Emma stood on the observation deck of her starship and looked out at the vast emptiness of space. The stars stretched before her like diamonds scattered on black velvet, each one holding the possibility of new worlds, new experiences, and new dangers. She had lived for 300 years, but the universe still managed to surprise her. Her pointed ears twitched slightly as she sensed the presence of Obsidian approaching from behind. The dragon was massive, his scales catching the starlight and reflecting it in shades of midnight blue and silver. He pressed his massive head against her shoulder in a gesture of affection that had become familiar over the decades they had spent together. Emma ran her slender fingers along Obsidian's scales, feeling the warmth that radiated from his body. The dragon rumbled softly, a sound like distant thunder rolling across mountains. In his own way, Obsidian was trying to communicate with her. After so many years together, Emma had learned to understand the subtle ways her dragons expressed themselves. They did not speak in words like humans or elves did, but their thoughts reached her mind through a connection that went deeper than language. It was something ancient and primal, a bond that had existed between dragons and those who truly understood them, since before written history began. Obsidian wanted to know if they would have a destination soon. He was restless, and rightfully so. They had been drifting through the outer reaches of the galactic rim for 3 months, avoiding contact with other ships and settlements. Emma had chosen this path deliberately. She had too many enemies across the galaxy, too many beings who remembered her from the wars that had raged across civilizations. There were governments that wanted to capture her for experimentation, warlords who saw her immortal life as a prize to steal, and ancient enemies who had sworn vengeance against her kind. The fall of Aelora still haunted her dreams. Emma could close her eyes and see the burning cities, the crystalline towers of her people melting like wax in the heat of orbital bombardment. She could hear the screams of her family as the Crimson Armada descended from the stars like a plague of locusts. Her sister had been the last to fall, her final thoughts reaching Emma across the dying telepathic network of their people. Then there was only silence. The elf civilization that had existed for over 20,000 years had been erased in a single night of fire and death. That had been 50 years ago, and Emma had spent every day since then trying to find meaning in a universe that had taken everything from her. She had discovered that helping others gave her purpose. When she encountered beings in distress, she found it impossible to ignore their pleas for assistance. It was not out of any sense of duty or obligation. It was simply because she could not bear to watch the universe consume the innocent without offering what resistance she could provide. Sapphire emerged from the lower decks, her smaller form darting through the corridors with the speed that made her so valuable in dangerous situations. Unlike Obsidian, Sapphire was built for agility and precision rather than raw power. Her scales were brilliant sapphire blue with streaks of violet that seemed to glow when she moved through shadows. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, constantly observing, constantly analyzing their surroundings. She had once told Emma through their mental connection that she could see the world in patterns and connections that other beings missed. She could track movements through space with an intuition that bordered on precognitive. The 2 dragons had come into Emma's life at different times. Obsidian had found her on a dying world where she had crash-landed after fleeing from a conflict station nearly 200 years ago. The dragon had been young then, only 50 years old, which was still considered adolescent for his kind. He had been wounded, caught in the crossfire between 2 warring factions that cared nothing for the suffering of a single creature. Emma had healed him using the old elven magic that still flowed through her veins, and in that moment, a bond had been forged that transcended species and time. Sapphire had come to Emma much later, only 80 years ago. The smaller dragon had been enslaved by a merchant fleet that used dragons for transport and labor. Emma had liberated her from captivity and had spent years helping Sapphire recover from the psychological trauma of enslavement. It had taken decades for Sapphire to trust that she was truly free, that Emma would not use her for any purpose other than what Sapphire herself chose. Now Sapphire was fiercely loyal, and Emma understood that this loyalty was a gift that had been earned through patience and genuine care. The ship's communication system suddenly crackled to life, and Emma's hand moved instinctively to the control panel. The signal was weak and broken, cutting in and out between waves of static, but she could make out enough to understand that a distress call was being broadcast from somewhere in the nearby sector. The message repeated over and over, a human voice growing more desperate with each repetition. A colony station was under attack and their defensive shields were failing. They had perhaps 6 hours before their life support systems would become compromised by the enemy assault. Emma did not hesitate for even a moment. She moved to the navigation console and began plotting a course toward the colony's last known coordinates. Obsidian and Sapphire both sensed her decision, and they moved into position on either side of her. The three of them had done this many times before. They understood each other's instincts and movements without needing to discuss strategy. Emma would pilot the ship while her dragons would prepare themselves for whatever combat might be necessary to protect those who were suffering. As the engines began to hum with increasing power, Emma thought about the choice she was making. She was choosing to take a risk. She was choosing to engage with a conflict that could bring attention from enemies she had carefully avoided for decades. She was choosing to enter a situation where she might be captured or killed, and yet she knew with absolute certainty that she had no real choice at all. This was who she was at her core. This was the fundamental truth of her being. She was a protector, and she could not become anything else even if she tried. The stars began to blur as the ship accelerated to faster than light speed. Emma felt the familiar sensation of the hyperdrive engaging. That moment when the laws of normal physics seemed to bend and twist around her vessel. It was not a comfortable feeling, but it was one that had become normal after so many years of traversing the galaxy. She closed her eyes for just a moment and reached out with her mind to touch the consciousness of both her dragons. Through that mental connection, she sent them an image of what she had learned from the distress signal. A human colony, approximately 5,000 souls spread across a series of interconnected structures. They were being attacked by a faction known as the Void Hunters, beings who had once been human but had been transformed into something else through brutal genetic modification and cybernetic enhancement. They were raiders and slavers who preyed on isolated settlements and outposts. They were known for their brutality and their complete disregard for the lives of those they victimized. Obsidian and Sapphire both sent back waves of determination and readiness. They had faced enemies of this caliber before. They had never lost a confrontation where Emma was with them. The connection between the three of them was so strong that they moved almost as a single organism when combat came. Emma's tactical knowledge combined with Obsidian's raw power and Sapphire's precision made them a formidable force that had saved numerous settlements and outposts over the decades. Emma allowed herself a small smile as she monitored the hyperdrive status. The colony would be reached in approximately 3 hours. That would give the Void Hunters enough time to breach the outer defenses, but it would hopefully be early enough that the colony could still be saved. She had learned through bitter experience that timing was everything in these rescue operations. Arrive too late and there would be no one left to save. Arrive too early and she might be forced into a prolonged battle that could attract more attention than she wanted. She thought about the message she had received on the communication channel. The human voice had carried such desperation, such fear. She recognized that sound because she had heard it many times before in many different forms, from many different species. It was the sound of beings facing extinction, facing the possibility that everyone and everything they cared about might be destroyed in the next few hours. It was the sound that never failed to move her to action. As the ship traveled through the hyperspace corridors, Emma began making preparations. She checked the weapon systems of her vessel, ensuring that all defensive systems were operational and ready. She accessed the tactical database and reviewed what information was available about Void Hunter tactics and capabilities. She made certain that medical supplies were well stocked and ready for the wounded, that she would undoubtedly need to treat after the conflict. She triple-checked the emergency broadcast systems that would allow her to coordinate with the colony survivors. Obsidian rested his massive head on the armrest of Emma's command chair, a gesture that conveyed both affection and the warrior's readiness that came before any significant conflict. Sapphire perched on a nearby console, her sharp eyes never stopping their constant surveillance of the ship's systems. Together the colony appeared on the view screen like a flickering beacon slowly being extinguished. Emma could see the damage from great distance. Multiple sections of the station were already showing signs of catastrophic failure. Oxygen was venting into space in visible plumes that caught the light of the nearby star. Automated defense turrets were firing sporadically, their power output diminishing with each passing moment. The Void Hunter assault vessels were positioned around the colony like predators circling wounded prey. Emma brought her ship to within weapons range but maintained enough distance to observe the tactical situation more clearly. There were 7 Void Hunter vessels, each one bristling with weaponry that had been hastily grafted onto their frames through brutal engineering. They were not elegant or beautiful like the ships of most advanced civilizations. They were purely functional instruments of destruction, built only for one purpose: to break through defenses and claim whatever resources and captives could be taken. The lead Void Hunter vessel was significantly larger than the others. Emma recognized it immediately as a command cruiser, the flagship of whatever raider faction was operating in this sector. She began running targeting calculations while simultaneously opening a channel to the colony's command center. For a moment, nothing but static answered her call. Then a human voice, weak and strained from exhaustion and fear, crackled through her communication system. "This is Colony Station Epsilon 7, requesting assistance. Identify yourself immediately. If you are another Void Hunter force, you are warned that we will not yield. If you are a rescue vessel, we welcome any help you can provide. Our shields are at 20% and dropping. We have sustained casualties numbering in the hundreds. Our situation is critical and deteriorating rapidly." Emma activated her own identification beacon and began transmitting specifications of her vessel and weapons capabilities. The colony commander needed to understand that rescue was possible. He needed to have hope even as his world was crumbling around him. Her voice was calm and measured when she spoke through the communication channel. "This is Emma of the Wandering Star. I am responding to your distress signal. I'm equipped with advanced weapon systems and I have combat support. I am commencing attack on the Void Hunter assault force now. Maintain your shields and concentrate your remaining firepower on the command cruiser. Do not attempt to flee. I will cover your withdrawal once the Void Hunters have been neutralized or forced to retreat." She did not wait for an acknowledgement before she began executing her planned attack sequence. Emma's ship was small compared to the Void Hunter vessels, but it was built with technologies that few beings in the galaxy understood. The elves had been masters of directed energy weapons and advanced tactical systems before their civilization fell. Emma had maintained and upgraded this technology, even after being the last survivor of her kind. Her ship was far more capable than its modest size would suggest. She fired the first salvo of energy bolts at the nearest Void Hunter vessel. The bolts were brilliant blue, streaking through the darkness of space with lethal precision. They impacted the enemy ship's shielding and caused the entire structure to shudder with the impact. The Void Hunters had not been expecting opposition of this caliber. Their assault had been proceeding against a civilian colony with minimal military capability. The sudden arrival of a well-armed opponent created immediate confusion in their ranks. Obsidian and Sapphire were positioned in the external cargo pods, mechanical extensions that had been grafted onto the hull of the ship. Emma could launch her dragons directly into the vacuum of space, where they would operate using their own natural resilience and the specialized armor that had been designed for them across centuries of modification and enhancement. This tactic was dangerous and required absolute trust between Emma and her dragons. It was also devastatingly effective. Emma initiated the launch sequence and felt the slight vibration that indicated her dragons had deployed into combat. Through the external cameras, she watched as Obsidian and Sapphire burst from the launch pods. Their wings extended to catch the solar wind that pushed particles through the vacuum of space. They were not meant to be in this environment by nature, but they had been enhanced and modified until they could survive and even thrive in the hostile conditions of open space. Obsidian immediately oriented himself toward the second-largest Void Hunter vessel and began accelerating toward it with terrifying speed. His scales projected a defensive field that allowed him to move through the dangerous radiation environment without suffering damage. Sapphire took a different approach, weaving between the enemy vessels and disrupting their coordination through targeted strikes against their external sensors and communication arrays. The Void Hunters reacted with panic and confusion. This was not a battle they had anticipated or trained for. They were accustomed to overwhelming civilian targets with superior numbers and firepower. They were not equipped to handle a coordinated three-pronged assault against determined and highly skilled defenders. Their tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly as both the colony and Emma's ship continued to rain firepower upon them. Emma executed a complex pattern of evasive maneuvers while simultaneously maintaining her targeting lock on the enemy command cruiser. She fired another volley of energy bolts, and this time several impacted directly on the enemy vessel's shields. She could see them flaring and dimming, their energy reserves being depleted faster than they could regenerate them. The Void Hunters were losing this engagement badly, and their commander would have to make a decision soon whether to continue fighting or attempt to retreat. Obsidian smashed into the second-largest Void Hunter vessel with the force of a meteor. His claws raked across the enemy hull, tearing through the metallic plating and exposing the internal systems beneath. The dragon roared, a sound that resonated through multiple frequencies and actually transmitted through the ship's communication system to all the vessels in the area. It was a roar of fury and determination, the sound of a being who had fought too many battles to be intimidated by anything the galaxy could throw at him. Sapphire continued her precise work, striking at the enemy force's ability to coordinate and communicate. She had destroyed 3 communication satellites and 3 sensor arrays, effectively blinding the Void Hunter flotilla. Without the ability to see clearly or communicate with each other, they could not execute complex tactical maneuvers. They could not support each other or concentrate their firepower effectively. Sapphire had transformed the battle from a coordinated assault into a collection of individual ships fighting independently. The colony commander's voice came through Emma's communication system again, and this time the tone had changed significantly. There was hope now, combined with renewed determination. The colonists had seen what one skilled warrior and 2 dragons could accomplish. They had witnessed the transformation of what seemed like certain destruction into a battle that could actually be won. Our defenses are holding better now. Your assault has disrupted their coordination. We are concentrating our firepower on their vessels and scoring significant hits. We have already destroyed one of their support ships completely. If we can maintain this intensity for another 10 minutes, I believe we can break their assault formation and force a retreat. Emma acknowledged the message while simultaneously calculating her next move. The enemy command cruiser was heavily damaged now, but still operational. Its shields were failing, but they were not completely gone. If she could concentrate enough firepower on a single point, she might be able to breach them and force the enemy ship into full retreat. Obsidian was still engaged with the second largest vessel, but he was winning that individual combat decisively. She changed her targeting parameters and began focusing all of her weapons on the same section of the command cruiser's hull. Bolt after bolt, stream after stream of directed energy impacted the same area. The enemy shields flared and crackled under the strain. Emma could see the section beginning to glow red from the heat being generated by the constant bombardment. Internal explosions began ripping through that section of the vessel as critical systems were overloaded and destroyed. The command cruiser's weapons went silent. Emma recognized the tactical defeat immediately. A ship losing weapons capability in combat was a ship that had already lost the war. The Void Hunters would have to abandon this assault or face complete annihilation. Emma had given them a choice, and they were intelligent enough to recognize when a battle was truly lost. The Void Hunter command cruiser began accelerating away from the combat zone, its damaged engines pushing it toward hyperspace capacity as quickly as they could manage. The remaining assault vessels saw their commanders retreat and began following immediately. They were running, abandoning the colony and escaping before Emma's forces could inflict more damage. Emma docked her ship at the colony's main station and immediately began the process of unloading medical supplies and rescue equipment. The colony commander, a man named Robert, met her in the docking bay with tears in his eyes. He was older than most humans she encountered, probably somewhere in his 7th or 8th decade of life. He moved with the stiffness of someone who had endured many years of physical labor and hardship in the unforgiving environment of deep space colonization. I cannot thank you enough for what you have done here. If you had arrived just 30 minutes later, we would all be dead. The Void Hunters have been harassing the outer colonies for months, but this was the first time they committed a full assault force to an attack. We were unprepared for this level of threat. They simply would have overwhelmed our defenses and taken what they wanted. You have saved not just our lives, but the future of this entire settlement. Emma stepped out of her ship, and for the first time, Robert saw her clearly in full light. His eyes widened as he took in her pointed ears and the luminescent quality of her skin. He had heard legends of the elves, but he had never expected to encounter one actually in his presence. Most humans believed that the elves had been completely destroyed, that their extinction was permanent and total. You are an elf. I thought your kind were all dead. The Crimson Armada destroyed your civilization 50 years ago. How is this possible? How are you still alive? Emma did not answer immediately. She had learned long ago that the story of her survival and her individual existence as the last of her kind was not something she wanted to share with every being she encountered. It was too painful, too personal. Instead, she focused on the practical matters at hand. You have wounded who need medical treatment. I have supplies that can help with the most critical cases. I also have the technical expertise to help your people begin repairs on your life support systems. We should focus on survival first and explanations later. Robert nodded, understanding the redirect. He led Emma deeper into the colony, and what she saw was heartbreaking. The colony had been constructed in the style that humans preferred. Large open spaces and modular structures that could be expanded or repurposed as needed. But now much of that infrastructure was damaged and broken. Walls had been breached by the Void Hunter assault. Internal systems were leaking precious atmosphere into the void. Bodies of the deceased lay in temporary storage areas while their families grieved. Emma moved through the colony like a ghost, her presence both alien and somehow comforting to the terrified colonists. She treated the wounded with an efficiency and skill that spoke of centuries of experience in emergency medicine. She sutured wounds that would have been fatal without intervention. She stabilized the critically injured so they could survive the long journey to proper medical facilities. She gave hope to those who had felt it slipping away as the Void Hunters pressed their assault. Obsidian and Sapphire remained aboard the ship, healing from their wounds in the medical bay that Emma had equipped with advanced regeneration technology. Dragons were resilient creatures, but they still needed time to recover from significant injuries. Sapphire's burns would require at least 2 days of continuous treatment before she was fully healed. Obsidian's wing injury was more serious and might take longer to fully repair. As Emma worked, she received a communication from an unexpected source. Her ship's external sensors detected an incoming vessel, not the Void Hunters returning, but something different. It was a military frigate bearing the insignia of the Galactic Federation Authority, the organization that maintained some semblance of order across multiple sectors of space. The Federation had limited power and resources, but they did try to respond to reports of conflict and violations of their regulations. The Federation vessel entered into orbit around the colony, and Emma felt the subtle shift that indicated they had scanned her ship and probably the entire colony as well. She knew what they would find. They would identify her vessel as an older elf technology type, one that technically violated several Federation regulations regarding advanced weapon systems. They would want to investigate, to question, to understand why a vessel of this type was operating in Federation space. She continued her work, treating the wounded and helping the colonists restore their life support systems. She was not going to allow bureaucratic procedures to interfere with her mission to save lives. If the Federation wanted to detain her or investigate her, they could do so after she had completed her humanitarian work. She suspected that they would not be too aggressive given that she had just saved thousands of lives. A federal agent arrived at the colony within the hour. His name was Thomas, and he carried himself with the confidence that came from working for a larger authority. He watched Emma work for several minutes before finally approaching her directly. "I am Federal Agent Thomas Wright. I need to ask you some questions regarding your vessel and your activities in this sector. Your ship matches the profile of several vessels that have been flagged for illegal weapons proliferation. I need to see your credentials and understand why you are operating advanced military technology in Federation space." Emma did not stop her work as she responded. She was carefully monitoring a patient's neural activity, ensuring that the regeneration technology was working correctly and not causing additional damage to the patient's brain systems. "My credentials are ancient and pre-Federation. My ship was built when your organization did not even exist. I have saved this colony from destruction by Void Hunter raiders. If you wish to detain me or investigate me, you are welcome to do so after I have finished treating the wounded. The lives of these colonists take priority over your administrative procedures and regulatory compliance requirements." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but Robert stepped forward and placed himself between the agent and Emma. The colony commander's voice was firm and commanding, cutting through any protest that Thomas might have considered making. "Agent Wright, this woman has saved our lives. She has risked her own existence to protect us from total annihilation. I am requesting that you allow her to complete her humanitarian work without interruption. If you attempt to interfere with her assistance to my people, I will file a formal complaint with your regional supervisor and request that your agency be replaced by a competitor organization that better understands the needs of frontier colonists." Thomas seemed to be calculating the political ramifications of what Robert was suggesting. Frontier colonies were important to the Federation's expansion agenda. Losing authority in this sector would be a black mark on his record. He made a decision to stand down, at least for the moment. "Very well. I will allow you to complete your medical work. However, I will be observing and I will eventually need to conduct a full investigation into your presence here. I do have questions about your origins and your motivations for assisting this colony. Those questions will not simply disappear." Emma acknowledged him with a slight nod but did not engage further in conversation. She had encountered federal agents before, and she understood their mentality. They wanted to classify and catalog everything, to ensure that everything fit neatly into their regulatory framework. But the universe was far too vast and too complex to fit neatly into any framework. There were always exceptions and irregularities. She was one of those exceptions. Over the next several hours, Emma continued her work and Thomas watched from a distance, making notes and observations. The federal agent was professional enough to stay out of the way while she worked. But his presence was clearly a reminder that there would be consequences for her actions beyond simply saving a colony. By rescuing the colonists, she had drawn attention from galactic authorities. Her carefully maintained isolation was being disrupted by her own compassion and sense of duty. By the time Emma had treated the last of the critical cases and helped the colony secure their primary life support systems, she was physically exhausted. Even an immortal elf had limits on how long she could function at maximum capacity without rest. She sat down on one of the colony's benches and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe and recover. Robert approached her with gratitude and concern mixed together in his expression. He carried food and water for her, understanding that even beings with advanced physiology needed to maintain their physical form. "You have done so much for us, and we have not even properly welcomed you or offered you the hospitality that you deserve. Please allow us to provide you with rest and recovery. Our best quarters are yours for as long as you wish to remain here. We will ensure that your needs are met and your comfort is prioritized." Emma accepted his offer because she knew that refusing would cause offense. She would rest here for a few hours, and then she would need to check on her dragons and ensure that they were healing properly. After that, she would need to face whatever questions the federal agent Thomas had prepared for her. The simple act of saving a colony had transformed her status from an isolated wanderer to someone who would need to account for her actions to authorities and governments that wanted to understand and categorize every aspect of her existence. Emma returned to her ship after resting in the colony for 6 hours. The sleep had been minimal, interrupted by the weight of knowing that Thomas was preparing his investigation and that her future freedom was now uncertain. She checked on Obsidian first, finding the massive dragon in the medical chamber, his wounds showing significant improvement. The regeneration technology was doing its work, sealing the gash on his wing and reducing the swelling in his damaged tissues. Through their mental connection, she felt Obsidian's impatience. He wanted to fly again, to move freely through space rather than being confined to this medical chamber. Emma sent him waves of reassurance and a promise that he would be able to leave soon. Her dragons had saved her life more times than she could count. They had endured hardship and pain alongside her. Now she would ensure that they received the proper time to heal, even if Obsidian's temperament made that healing process feel eternal to him. Sapphire was further along in her recovery. The smaller dragon's burns were mostly healed, and she could move around the ship without significant pain. She chirped a greeting to Emma when she entered the secondary medical chamber, and Emma returned the greeting with a hand placed gently on Sapphire's scaled neck. The connection between them strengthened, and Sapphire's joy at seeing Emma was palpable. It was one of the few purely positive emotions that Emma allowed herself to fully experience in these complicated moments. Emma then activated her main computer systems and reviewed the Federation database entries that Thomas had accessed regarding her vessel. The files were technically restricted, but her ship had capabilities that allowed her to monitor federal data transmissions. She wanted to understand what Thomas had discovered about her and what conclusions he might have already formed. The records showed that the Federation had been tracking the disappearance of advanced elf technology vessels for centuries. They had found scattered remains and wreckage indicating that elf civilization had indeed fallen to the Crimson Armada, as documented in historical records. But the Federation had never discovered any surviving elf vessels operating at full capacity. The fact that Emma's ship existed and was apparently fully functional was anomalous and concerning to the Federation. Authorities, there were also files regarding historical incidents where Emma's ship had been observed intervening in conflicts across multiple sectors. The Federation had compiled a list of incidents where a vessel matching Emma's specifications had appeared to save colonies or settlements from destruction. In every case, the destroyer vessels had retreated or been defeated. In every case, the endangered population had been preserved. In every case, the mysterious vessel had departed without collecting any resources or demanding any payment or recognition. Thomas would be forming a profile of her as an individual. He would likely conclude that she was acting out of some sense of moral obligation, rather than material self-interest. He would recognize that she represented no direct threat to Federation authority, and that she had consistently acted in ways that aligned with Federation values, even if she sometimes violated Federation regulations. These facts would probably lead him toward cautious tolerance rather than aggressive prosecution. Her communication system activated, and Thomas's face appeared on the screen. The Federal agent looked tired, as if his investigation had been consuming his time and energy. He requested that she meet with him in person at a neutral location within the colony, so that they could discuss the investigation more formally. Emma agreed to the meeting and arranged to meet Thomas in the colony's central conference facility in 1 hour. She spent that time preparing herself mentally for what would likely be a difficult conversation. Thomas would ask difficult questions about her origins, her motivations, and her future intentions. She would need to balance honesty with maintaining her privacy and protecting herself from potential threats. When she arrived at the conference facility, Thomas was waiting for her with several data tablets and a recording device. He was professional but not unfriendly, which suggested that his investigation had not revealed anything that he considered immediately dangerous or threatening. Emma, I have been reviewing your service record and the history of your interventions across multiple sectors. The Federation is aware of at least 17 incidents in the past 50 years, where your vessel has intervened to prevent the destruction of colonies or settlements. In every case, you have succeeded in protecting the endangered population. In every case, you have asked for nothing in return and requested no recognition or compensation. This pattern of behavior is consistent with someone who is acting out of moral conviction rather than material motivation. Emma listened without interrupting. She understood that Thomas was establishing a baseline assessment of her character and motivations. Thomas continued, "The regulations that technically apply to your vessel are outdated. They were written when the Federation was first established, and when there was less understanding of elf technology and elf civilization. It is my professional opinion that these regulations should be updated to account for exceptional cases like yours. However, that is not my decision to make. I need to report my findings to my supervisors, and they will need to make a determination regarding your status and your future legal standing in Federation space." Emma spoke for the first time, her voice calm and measured. "I understand the position you are in, Agent Wright. I do not expect the Federation to simply ignore my violations of their regulations. I expect that there will be consequences, but I also expect that you will be fair in your assessment and that you will consider the overall impact of my actions rather than focusing exclusively on technical violations." Thomas nodded slowly. "I'm going to recommend that your vessel be classified as a Federation Cultural Heritage Site. This designation would give you legal authority to operate in Federation space without being subject to the standard weapons regulations. It would also provide you with limited protection from aggressive investigation or legal action by other authorities. However, this designation comes with a responsibility. You would be expected to continue your humanitarian work and to maintain the highest standards of ethics and conduct. You would be subject to periodic monitoring and reporting requirements. And most importantly, you would be representing not just yourself but the entire elf civilization and the values that your people stood for." Emma understood the weight of what Thomas was offering. She would gain some measure of legal protection and official status, but she would lose some of her freedom and independence. She would become a symbol and a representative rather than a purely independent actor. It was a significant change to her circumstances. "I accept these terms," she said. "I have spent 50 years living in isolation and trying to avoid attention. I have learned that isolation is not sustainable. If my actions can help preserve the memory of my people and advance the values of compassion and protection, then I am willing to accept the responsibilities that come with that role." Thomas seemed satisfied with her response. He deactivated the recording device and gathered his data tablets. He told her that his report would be filed with the Federation headquarters, and she could expect an official designation certificate within 2 weeks. Until then, she was free to continue her humanitarian work without fear of federal interference or legal consequences. After Thomas left the conference room, Emma found herself sitting alone with her thoughts. She had just fundamentally changed her relationship with the broader galaxy. She was no longer operating in the shadows. She was now an officially recognized representative of a deceased civilization, authorized to act with certain protections and privileges, but also with significant responsibilities. She returned to her ship and moved to the observation deck. From there, She could see the colony and the vast expanse of space beyond. Somewhere out there in that darkness were countless beings suffering and struggling to survive. There were injustices being perpetrated by those who preyed on the weak and defenseless. There were opportunities to make a difference in the lives of individuals and communities that had no one else to turn to for help. Emma reached out mentally to both of her dragons. She sent them images and feelings of what the future might hold. Obsidian and Sapphire both responded with their own mix of acceptance and determination. They understood that their role in the galaxy was transforming. They had been companions and warriors. Now they would be something more. They would be symbols of an ancient civilization that had chosen to return to the stars not as conquerors but as protectors. As evening descended on the colony and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Emma made a decision. She would remain here for another week, helping the colonists with repairs and reconstruction. She would ensure that they were properly established and that their settlement could survive and flourish after the Void Hunter attack. Only then would she and her dragons return to the stars to continue their mission. 7 days passed, and the colony underwent a remarkable transformation. The breached sections of the station had been sealed and stabilized. The damaged life support systems had been repaired and upgraded, using technologies from Emma's ship that far exceeded the colony's original specifications. The colonists had begun the long process of grieving and healing from the trauma they had experienced during the Void Hunter assault, and Emma had earned the gratitude and affection of every person living in the settlement. Children would follow her through the corridors, fascinated by her pointed ears and the way she moved with a grace that seemed almost unnatural to human eyes. Adults would thank her continuously, offering her food and gifts and making it clear that she would always be welcome in their community. Robert had asked her multiple times if she would consider staying permanently, perhaps even helping to expand the colony and establish new settlements in the surrounding region. But Emma knew that she could not remain. Her purpose was not to build permanent settlements or to become comfortable in any single location. Her purpose was to be a guardian and protector, moving through the galaxy in search of those who needed help. Staying in one place would betray the fundamental mission that had driven her for the past 50 years. Obsidian had fully recovered from his wing injury and was flying around the colony's external docking facilities, practicing combat maneuvers and showing off for the colonists who watched in wonder. The great dragon had become a symbol of hope and power to the people of the colony. Children would stare up at him with their mouths open, unable to comprehend the size and majesty of such a creature. Obsidian, for his part, seemed to enjoy the attention and performed increasingly complex aerial displays. Sapphire had recovered completely from her burns and had been spending time with the colony's maintenance teams, observing how they worked and seemed to be offering suggestions about how to improve the efficiency of their repair processes. The smaller dragon had always been the most intellectually curious of Emma's two companions, and she seemed to derive satisfaction from helping. The humans understand better ways to solve their technical problems. Emma spent her final day on the colony saying personal goodbye to each person she had encountered during her time there. She spent time with Robert, discussing the colony's future and offering strategic advice about how to better defend against future attacks. She spoke with Thomas, who had received his formal authorization from Federation headquarters to grant Emma her cultural heritage designation. The official certificate had arrived, along with credentials that would allow her to operate with limited federal oversight and full legal authority to use her advanced weapon systems for defensive purposes. As evening descended on that final day, Emma stood on the observation deck of her ship and looked out at the colony one last time. She could see the lights of the habitation modules and the slowly rotating agricultural domes. She could see the movement of the colonists as they continued their evening routines, their lives having returned to something approaching normalcy after the chaos of the Void Hunter assault. Obsidian and Sapphire moved silently to either side of her, their presence a comfort and a reminder of the bonds that would endure, even as she moved forward into an uncertain future. Through their mental connection, they expressed their readiness to depart. They had enjoyed their time at the colony, but they were creatures of the stars and the endless void, not beings meant to remain stationary for extended periods. Emma began the startup sequence for her ship's hyperdrive. The engines hummed to life with a frequency that had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. She felt the subtle vibrations of the ship responding to her commands, preparing for the journey into hyperspace that would carry them toward whatever challenges and opportunities awaited them in the wider galaxy. As the ship pulled away from the colony, Emma received one final communication from Robert. His voice carried all the emotion that words could barely contain. He thanked her again for saving his people, and asked her to remember that she would always have a home among them. He told her that the colony would establish a memorial to the lives lost during the Void Hunter assault, and that he would ensure that she was remembered as the one who had prevented total annihilation. Emma promised that she would return someday, though she knew that if she did return, it might be years or decades in the future. She had learned the lesson that attachment and emotional bonds could both be sources of strength and sources of pain. She would carry the memory of this colony and its people with her, but she could not allow sentiment to distract her from her greater mission. The ship accelerated to faster than light speed, and the colony disappeared from view as the universe twisted around Emma's vessel in that peculiar way that hyperspace transit always produced. For a moment there was a sensation of dislocation, as if the normal laws of physics were being temporarily suspended. Then the ship settled into the familiar comfort of hyperspace travel. Emma made her way to the ship's main computer terminal and began accessing her databases of distress, signals, and emergency communications across all known sectors. There were hundreds of them, each one representing a situation where people or beings were in danger and crying out for help. She began analyzing them, looking for patterns and trying to determine where her presence would make the most difference. There was a colony on the far edge of the outer rim that was reporting problems with a resource extraction facility. Workers were dying from exposure to an unidentified toxin, and the medical personnel on site did not have the advanced diagnostic equipment necessary to identify the cause of the deaths. Emma could help with that. Her ship had the most advanced medical technology in the galaxy. There was a refugee fleet fleeing from a conflict zone in the central sectors. They were running out of supplies and had no destination. Their ships were damaged and barely functional. Emma could provide escort, supplies, and protection from those who would prey on vulnerable refugees. There was a mining station being terrorized by a pirate faction that had established itself in the nearby asteroid field. The station commander had sent out a desperate plea for assistance. Emma could investigate and determine whether direct intervention was necessary or whether other solutions could be found. She began plotting courses and calculating travel times. Within the hour, she had decided that she would first respond to the mining station emergency because it was the closest, and the situation seemed most immediately critical. Her ship accelerated to maximum speed, and Emma felt the familiar rush of purpose that always came when she was moving toward those who needed her. She thought about her conversation with Thomas and the official designation that the Federation had now granted her. She was no longer operating in the shadows. She was now an official representative of elf civilization, authorized to act with certain privileges and responsibilities. The weight of that designation was significant, but it was a weight she was willing to carry. Obsidian rested his massive head on the armrest of Emma's command chair, and Sapphire perched nearby, both dragons radiating quiet confidence. They had become a unit over the centuries of their existence together. They were stronger together than they could ever be individually, and as long as they remained united in their purpose, they could continue to make a difference in the lives of countless beings across the galaxy. Emma looked out at the stars rushing past as her ship traveled through hyperspace. She thought about the past 50 years and all that she had endured since the fall of Aelora. She thought about the loss and the grief that would never fully leave her. But she also thought about the colonists she had saved, the refugees she had protected, the injustices she had prevented. She thought about the future and all the opportunities it held for her to continue her mission. The pain of losing everything had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something different. It had become fuel for her determination to protect others from experiencing similar loss. It had become the foundation of her commitment to stand against those who preyed on the innocent and defenseless. It had become the reason that she moved through the galaxy as a guardian and protector. As the ship emerged from hyperspace and the mining station appeared on the view screen, Emma felt a sense of rightness and purpose that had become familiar to her. This was her life now. This was what she had chosen, and she would continue choosing it with every fiber of her being until the universe itself came to an end. She opened a communication channel to the mining station and began the process of coordinating her approach and gathering tactical information about the threat they were facing. Obsidian and Sapphire moved toward the combat preparation stations, readying themselves for whatever challenges awaited them. And Emma, the last elf of Aelora, steered her ship toward destiny with the confidence of one who had learned that even the greatest darkness could be held back by those willing to stand against it. The stars were infinite, and the night was deep. But Emma and her dragons would bring light to the darkness, one system at a time, one colony at a time, one life at a time. This was the path she had chosen, and she would walk it with honor and determination for as long as she existed.